The purpose of this evening is not to talk at you, but to talk with you. Parenting in 2021 is not an easy thing, and we have representatives here this evening. We have teachers, we have heads, we have parents, we have representatives from the church, and we want to tackle some of the issues that our young people are facing and discuss how do we help the young people to deal with the issues that they're facing in life. And so in order for that to happen, it means that you need to participate. So if you're in my life skills class, I'd be saying there's 3 things. You need to take good notes, you need to participate, and you need to think for yourselves. And I'll be saying the same things to you this evening. Those are the things that really make it work, is the more you participate and ask the questions that you want to know or bring the comments that you want to bring, the more it becomes a real discussion. We're not here to prescribe, we're here to discuss and find ways in which we can help our children to cope with the issues that they are facing. I first came across Kurarama. I was invited to a meeting that was educators and the church, again looking at the issues, and I loved the way that they tackled it by having a panel discussion rather than somebody doing a presentation. And in actual fact, statistics are showing that webinars are fast dying out. People want Zoom because they want to be interactive. And so we want to say to the folk joining us on Zoom this evening that you're welcome to participate too. The only thing you can't do is participate verbally, because that wouldn't work. We'd have all sorts of feedback and things like that. So if you've got questions, comments, please just type them into the chat on the Zoom, and Dave will have a look at that and try and work it into the conversation as we go. So I'd just like to pray and then hand over to Dave from Kurarama, and he'll introduce the panel, and then we're going to have a fun evening. So let's pray. Father, thank you that we can gather together, even if it's in a small number in this room, but thank you for the ability to have more people join us from their homes. And we just want to commit this evening into your hands. Lord, we recognize that the challenges that young people face, that all of us face in a world that has changed dramatically in the last 18 months are huge, Lord. And parenting at these times is such a difficult thing. And the more we can walk this journey together and help each other, the better it will be. And so we want to commit these discussions into your hands. Just ask that you would preside over all of our deliberations this evening, and that, Father, you'd help us, that we'd take away things that we can apply in our schools, in our homes, in our churches. So we commit this evening into your hands in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
I'm going to hand over to Dave from Kurarama, and I've worked with him on a panel similar to this with some Rosawi parents last year, and I love the way that he runs the panel, and he's just so perceptive and picks up things. So panel, get ready. There's going to be some tough questions coming your way. But Dave, over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Gus, and good evening, everybody. And just a quick note, we are seeing messages on the chat that the sound on the Zoom is not great. The technical team are working on it, and we hope that it gets cleared up. Folks, welcome. And to those of you that are sitting here, welcome, and thank you for coming out on a cold night. And welcome to everybody sitting at home that is zoomed in. I want to run through who's sitting next to me here, and we're very, very grateful for your time. On my immediate left, we've got Regina Chari, and I'm actually going to ask Regina to introduce herself.
Oh, you are?
Yes.
All right. Do I have to do it in the mic? Am I unmuted? All right. So I'm Regina Chari. I am American. You can probably tell from my accent. I'm married to a Zimbabwean man, Nyasha, and we have 2 beautiful girls. We have a 17-year-old and a 6-year-old. We have been married for 7 years, and I've been living in Zimbabwe for 16 years. So our eldest daughter, Ruth, came home through adoption when she was 10 years old. And I am a clinical social worker. I've been working with children, teenagers, and their families for about 20 years. And I have been sober from an alcohol and drug addiction for 22 years.
Thanks, Regina, and welcome. On our far left, we've got, on my far right, should I say, we've got Andrew Ellis. Andrew is pastor at River of Life Church,
That's right.
and he has been involved for many years with the youth through youth camps and youth groups.
That's right.
Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you.
And sitting next to Andrew, we have got Tavonga Gotu. Tavonga is a parent here at the junior school, and she's very involved in Association of Christian Schools Zimbabwe, and she is, am I right in saying, you're on the Theological College Board? Is that right? Welcome. And she's married to Simbarashe, and I believe she loves crochet, embroidery, and macrame.
And Simba.
Definitely.
And on my far left, I'm going to ask Justice if he would introduce himself.
Thank you. My name is Justice. I am a counselor with the Christian Counseling Center, and I work with a lot of children. I work with a lot of parents. I do a lot of counseling. Thank you.
Justice, thanks very much. And on my immediate right, we've got Shep Wazara, who I've worked with a couple of times now, and it's been great. And Shep is a coach, a public speaker, a trainer, and he's worked with children in leadership camps, in counseling, and has done many addiction interventions, and his work has taken them across Africa, Southern Africa in particular. Welcome, Shep.
Thanks, sir. Thank you.
Folks, so often when we are invited to come to a school event, a parenting seminar, we expect that we're going to be speaking about the children at the school or in your home. And tonight, we're doing a little bit differently. We are going to be speaking about the children, but we're going to be speaking about them in the context of you, as the parent, as the adult, as a teacher, or as a grandparent, or whoever you are, a guardian, someone who speaks into the life of a child. The key issue that we want to speak about tonight is, how does our behavior, the things that we do as adults, affect the development of a child's identity? And I think we all know that we've all ourselves have been through life where building an identity is a requirement. My own story involves the need to have an identity, and similar to Regina, I got myself involved from a very young age with drugs, an eating disorder, and battling, trying to understand who I am and where I fit. But more than that, as I've grown up and in the last few years, as I've been doing this work with Project Kurarama and speaking to children, realizing that I didn't know, even as a young adult, how to fit in, how to be okay with who I was. In his book, An Experiment in Criticism, written in 1961, C.S. Lewis says this: children are not deceived by fairy tales. They are often and gravely deceived by school stories. Adults are not deceived by science fiction. They can be deceived by the stories in the woman's magazine. And I think what we know, and the tough things that we don't talk about necessarily, is what are the influences on us as adults, and how are those influences being passed down to children? I'm going to go straight across to Justice. Justice works, as he's shared, in Christian education and counseling, and he runs the College of Marriage, am I correct in saying that? And he also works a lot with corporates, doing counseling in the corporate structure. And in a situation, in particular in the economy that we live in the environment that we live in, what are your experiences?
Thank you, Dave. What I can say is that from my observation, one of the things that affects children is that as parents, we are not available. We are so busy. And so we are focusing on making a living to look after the children. And we are not investing in spending time with children. What I've observed is parenting requires time. And as parents, we may have to be deliberate. I normally, when I talk to parents in the corporate world, I say to them, it's always important for you to reserve energy for your children. You will leave work and you will be exhausted. And children, when you come home, they need your attention. And if you don't learn the secret of reserving energy for your children, you will not be able to connect with them. So I've had to learn at a personal level to do that, to get home and then reserve time for my children. I've discovered it is paid to just do that. I've connected better with my children. We have discussed a lot of things which, as I was growing up personally, I never got an opportunity to talk about those things with my dad. I remember telling the team yesterday when we were just preparing for today, I was saying that some of the things that I've discussed with my grade 7 son, I would never have dared to speak about these things to my own dad. I wouldn't have, he would have eaten me alive. But I thank God for Christian education and for learning to connect with children by actually creating time. And this is what I will encourage all the parents who are here. Create time to connect with your children.
So what we're going to do now, taking a cue from Justice, we're going to take time. We know that our children are constantly coming to school and being asked questions and sitting and writing tests. And now it's your turn. So in front of you, you have a piece of paper. I hope, has everybody got the question, a piece of paper? Those that don't have one, there should be one, there's some spares. And up on the screen behind me, we're going to pose some questions. They are yes or no answers. Could I please make it very clear that please do not put your name or your contact details or what school you're from or your address. We don't want to know who you are. We just want to know your answers to these questions. So we're going to do this together like a class, okay? And the first question is this. Do you think it is okay to allow a school-going teen to drink alcohol even if supervised by parents? Yes or no? Do you think it is okay to allow a school-going teen to drink alcohol even if supervised by parents? Question number 2. Do you think that marijuana is a dangerous drug? Do you think that marijuana is a dangerous drug? Yes or no? If you're sitting at home and the sound is better and you can hear us, try and answer these questions for yourselves. Possibly you even want to discuss them afterwards. Question number 3. Has your family or group of friends been affected or exposed to drug or alcohol abuse in the last 2 years? Has your family or group of friends been affected by or exposed to drug and alcohol abuse in the last 2 years? Yes or no? Question number 4. Do you think it is okay to discuss gender and sexuality matters with a 12-year-old? Do you think it is okay to discuss gender and sexuality matters with a 12-year-old? Question number 5. Have you watched, looked at, or been exposed to any form of pornography in the last 12 months? Have you watched, looked at, or been exposed to any form of pornography in the last 12 months? Question number 6. Do you think that schools should be mandated to teach mental health to their pupils? Do you think that schools should be mandated to teach mental health to their pupils? Question number 7. Do you think the school where your children go are providing enough support for you and your child on mental health? Do you think that the school where your children go are providing enough support for you and your child on mental health? Yes or no? Question number 8. Do you think it is necessary for a school-going teen to have a smartphone? That's a hot question, and I'm sure it's going to come up in our discussion a little later on. Do you think it is necessary, yes or no, for a school-going teen to have a smartphone? Question number 9. Are you completely comfortable with your school-going child to be active on social media? Are you comfortable with your school-going child to be active on social media? I know that Regina would love to talk about this just now. Question number 10. Do you monitor your child's use of social media, TV, and internet? Do you monitor your child's use of social media, TV, or internet? Question number 11. Have you and or your children seen the effects of an absent father or parent figure? Have you or your children seen the effects of an absent father or a parent figure? Number 12, do you think a 10-year-old child is capable of recognizing the absent father or parent figure? Do you think a 10-year-old child is capable of recognizing the absent father or parent figure? Question number 13. In the last 2 years, have you seen parents act in ways that contradict their efforts or authority to discipline their child? In the last 2 years, have you seen parents act in ways that contradict their efforts or authority to discipline their children? Question 14. In the last 2 years, have you driven a vehicle whilst drunk? And the last question.
Can't remember.
In the last 2 years, have you driven a vehicle with children in whilst drunk? In the last 2 years, have you driven a vehicle with children in whilst drunk? Yes or no? Folks that are sitting with us here, those questions, the answers are your answers. On the reverse side of that piece of paper, if you could just fill in the details that we're asking for. We're just trying to collect some data and see what experiences are happening in families. And as I say, please do not put your name or your address or your phone number or any personal contact information on there. We're not interested in who answered what. We're only interested in the questions. Shep, as I was asking those questions, particularly the last 2 vehicles, I saw some facial expressions from you. Tough questions, maybe. But I do believe that if we're truly honest with ourselves here in Zimbabwe, our culture and how we think about alcohol is something that needs to be questioned.
Yeah, I think we really have to be careful because, especially with our children, there are 2 very critical things we need to know. The first thing is what are the things that our children are learning or things that they catch? So what are we modeling and what are we teaching? And if those 2 things contradict, our children or especially young people don't see us as genuine. And I'm sorry, but we would have shot ourselves in the foot.
We have one of the things that we get quite often when we get calls from parents, particularly of adolescents, young children or teenagers asking for help, is this sort of feeling of maybe it's denial, where they will ask a question about, for example, let me give a very specific example. About 2.5 years ago, we received a call from a very distraught and understandably distraught father. and they had caught their 15-year-old daughter with cocaine. And for any family, that would just be crazy, a crazy experience. And as we spoke to this father, I asked what I believe is would be a normal question to ask, is where has your 15-year-old daughter been, or who do you think she may have come in contact with where she would be able to get her hands on cocaine? The interesting thing for us is the response was not directly about where they were, but more about why they as the parents let their 15-year-old daughter go to a certain bar here in Harare because there's nothing to do. And the conversation completely shifted. There seems to be this belief that there's nothing to do, and that we need to widen, if I can call it that, Justice, the allowances for children to be entertained from a venue or physical, or even through the methods of entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, your thoughts?
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think that was possibly the right question to ask. Definitely when we come across this kind of thing, it's often parents coming down hard on a child without looking in the mirror. So often a lack of parenting leads to these things. Kids don't just go off and find these kind of things because they're fulfilled and loved and cared for and at home. There's a lack, and none of us are perfect parents, but I think so often you can reflect on these situations on the style of parenting, and the problem probably started at the age of 5 when a 15-year-old gets themselves in trouble. And so if we're honest, that's the parenting that we need to enforce and model to our children, that we can't catch them with this kind of substance and come down heavy-handed unless we can honestly look in the mirror and say, I've done all I can. Regina and others would be able to help me, but I think to respond in love at that moment is way more effective than harsh discipline, although it's the opposite of what you're feeling inside.
Regina, you want to respond to that? How do we respond in these situations? First of all, in terms of looking at ourselves, what allowances have we been given as adults for these situations potentially to have come about?
Sure. I mean, this is an enormous situation in which you've brought to us. I think there are a couple of things that we need to identify. A.E. is right. You want to respond to your children when they are falling off the rails. You want to respond with love, not demands. I mean, by the time you're 15 years old, your parenting influence is shifting with your children, right? You no longer have the influence you do when your child is like 6, like mine is. It's very, very different with a teenager. And you do want to respond with love. You do want to help them make decisions that are right for the future that they want for themselves. But I think regardless of the behavior, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drunk driving, whether it's skipping school or sex or pornography or an eating disorder, regardless of the behavior, I think we have to identify that the behaviors are simply a symptom of a problem. And when I go to a doctor and I tell them my symptoms, I don't look to them to assign blame. That's your parents' fault, that's the school's fault, that's the kid's fault. Like, I'm not looking for blame for my symptoms. I'm looking for a diagnosis and a cure, right? So if I'm looking at a child who's bringing cocaine home from a bar because they're bored and there's nothing for them to do, or I'm looking at a child who's 18 years old and drinking and driving, or 12 years old and having sex, after school, I'm looking at the symptom of a bigger problem. And I think that's what we're really here to talk about, is what is the problem? We know what the behaviors are. We're answering these questions. We see the headlines in the newspapers. We hear the stories in our friendship circles. We know the behaviors. We know the symptoms. What we don't know how to do is rectify it. We don't know the diagnosis, and we don't know the cure. And I would say, if a family came to me with this situation, that the diagnosis is an identity problem, right? We don't know who we are, we don't know whose we are, and we don't know what to do with the messages the world is sending to us about who we should be. And the truth of the matter is, as a parent, as a counselor for families, I will tell you that children don't know who they are because their parents don't know who they are. And we cannot give our children an identity grounded in positive self-worth if we don't have that for ourselves. And so I would say if children have these symptoms, these behavioral symptoms, then we have to, as parents, take a look at ourselves and say, what sort of identity are we giving our children? Are we telling them that their identity is based on who their friends are? Are we telling them that their identity is based on how popular they are, if they go to the bar where all the other kids are hanging out? Or are we telling them that their identity is based on how uniquely created they are, that they are a child of God, and that they have specific giftings in their life that is going to drive them into the future that they're meant to have, right? We want to identify our children's identity as based on who they are created to be, not on who other people see them as. And that has to start, like Andrew's saying, at a very young age. That doesn't start when they're 15, but it can be rectified when they're 15. If we haven't been able to offer that to them as young children, we can correct it in their adolescence.
You know, with the advent of social media, the power of social media, and growing up in this society where it's about the click and the thumbs up, and I've heard it said, young girls are not growing up anymore, they are glowing up. Or young men are not growing up anymore, they're building up. And you know, there are so many stories, and another thing we have, Tavonga, in our field of work is we've got this thing which we call global denial, that these things don't happen here. This doesn't happen in Zimbabwe. And yet the reality is, and the obvious reality is, we're using exactly the same Facebook or TikTok or Snapchat or whatever social media it is. It's a dangerous platform, isn't it? And I think some people have had some terrible experiences. And the thing of bullying or using, I would rather talk about now, is using this platform, this social media platform, to create and develop your own identity. What have you seen, Tavonga?
Thanks, Dave. Without making it a very long-winded discussion, I think at Gateway we had a session a few years back about whether we should allow primary school-going children to use a cell phone or have a smartphone. And I think the general consensus that we took from there as a family was that primary school-going children shouldn't be on social media or using cell phones just because of their age and their impressionability. And as a family, we decided that Form 1 was a good time to introduce a phone. When our eldest hit high school, for the first part of Form 1, she was sharing her phone with me. So all her messages, all her groups were on my phone. And we would, I would have access to them. I would see the messages coming in, and we could discuss some of the dangers. Like, I would wake up in the morning and there's 85 messages from her groups, and some of them are being posted at 4 a.m., at 3 a.m. And my daughter was sleeping, I was sleeping, but her friends are texting. So those were talking moments and training moments and teaching moments that we had about the use of cell phones and everything. And the one thing that we drew from the need, from the use of cell phones, was the need for communication. So from early on, we told our daughter that you really need to talk to us about anything that happens on the phones. And Gateway is big on think. Before you do anything, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And that is what we encouraged her to do with her own posts and her conversations and everything on the phone. And with all the love and all the support and all the guidelines that we had put in place, this year my daughter was a target of cyberbullying. And fortunately, because the windows were open, in fact, the other thing that my husband and I did was, our children cannot be on platforms that we are not. So when she was on Instagram, I'm on Instagram. So I'm one of those older people not on Facebook, but on Instagram, because I'm trying to follow where my children are. So that helped because I understood the app, I understood how it worked, And when she came to me and showed me that someone was bullying her, I got my sister and myself onto reporting this bully to Instagram. And the whole night, every 2 minutes, we were posting a report and posting a report. By midnight, we had received an email from Facebook to say, yes, we've seen your report and we're removing this account. And if as parents, we just give our children phones and we ourselves don't understand what is happening on those phones and what kind of interactions happen on those phones. If I didn't know anything about Instagram and my daughter came and said, I'm being bullied, I wouldn't know that you can report. I wouldn't know that, there's a function to contact Facebook and say, this is happening to my daughter and I don't like it. So my encouragement is bullying is real and it's not a first world thing. Even here, locally, your children can be targeted. And as wonderful and as innocent as your children are, they can be targets of bullies. And you need to be there for them and there with them. And I think AE nailed it on the head about a loving response. Because it would have been very easy for me to ask her, what did you do to deserve this? Are you also bullying people or whatever? But discussing the issue in love and just seeing how traumatized she was and being there for her and walking with her along this. She was so grateful when she woke up the next morning and I could show her a Facebook email to say that account has been taken down, that person won't bully you anymore. So it's important that we are not in denial about the things that our children are facing and that we are there with them.
Yeah. I'm not a parent. And when I think back on the things that I did and the trauma I put my parents through, at the moment, I'm quite glad I'm not a parent. And the things that I was capable of without social media. How do we teach? What are we teaching them and about being safe on social media, Justice?
Well, you will become a parent. So parenting is not easy, friends. One of the things that I've had to do personally is to learn a lot of things. I've discovered that our greatest challenge as parents is wanting to raise our children the way we were raised. And that world no longer exists. So if we are to parent the 21st child, we must become, students forever.
Learn.
Learn.
So it's a good point that you bring up because we've traveled to many schools and two comments that are regular, Andrew, that come from the teenagers is, one, do the parents know us? Do they know how we have to face this world? And I think the answer is no. But the point is, how does a parent get to understand and know the world that their child's growing up in?
I would say be involved, similar to what Tavongo said. If your child has Instagram, then either you or your wife should be on Instagram and learning. It's a great lesson. We've laughed in our house as my wife recently opened an Instagram account and the kids are teaching her how to use it. I gave up. I tried and then said, okay, it's over to you. So it's not easy for us older folks. I think to know all that your kids are doing. My children love Minecraft at the moment. There are other games out there. I think if you say, you're not allowed, they will do it anyway, behind your back. So it's better to say what game or what are you going to do and try and learn it to go with them. Then you're speaking their language, you're understanding what they're saying. There is a whole new language of the phone which we have to learn because we sit at our dining room table and the kids will have their own discussion about social media pages, and often I won't actually know what they're talking about, but they're still speaking English. And it's because I've fallen behind the pace on knowing what they're talking about. So I would say one thing to avoid the child saying, Mom or Dad don't actually know what we're going through is our ignorance of the games and the gaming and the social media accounts. So I would say as Justice said, open an account and see how you do. Just watch out, it's addictive. Yeah, and so you've got to balance it. Yeah.
The second comment that we always get back, I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit now and probably go back to Justice here because of what you do, Justice. We get this comment on, we live in a world of contradiction. And to put it in a nutshell, it's do as I say, not as I do. Now, we could easily continue this conversation on drinking, on drink driving, on the use of technology and things like that. But what about the future? What about the future of a child? So we all know the environment that we live in Zimbabwe and this culture of conversation around dinner tables, particularly when we're probably talking to 16 and 17-year-olds, is how well you need to do in your O-levels so that you can get to university, so that you can get out of this country. What is that doing to the youth in this? Andrea, I'm going to go back to you actually, from a biblical point of view. For me, what this talks about is family. Is we grow up in a place that is home. And these kind of conversations we're actually as a family pushing our children away or the children away and saying, get out, because this is not a good place for you. What effect does that have?
It's a good question. I think it's very right what you share and what you speak about. The first thing is, are we sitting around our dinner table and talking with our children? I think you may call me old-fashioned, but one meal a day around a dinner table with all the kids there. We do highlight of the day. What was the highlight of your day? What was the low point of your day? Those kind of conversations. Too many meals I had in front of the TV, or your supper's in the oven and I'm going to watch the football kind of thing. So I think once those conversations are happening, then from a biblical point of view, we have sat with our children and said, do you understand why we live in this place? It's a good question to ask. Because definitely 16, 17, they're beginning to say, Dad, Cape Town is wonderful and, why don't we go there? We speak about God's calling on our lives. This is what we're called to do. This is where God's called us as a family. We're on a journey as a family. And God will call you one day somewhere. Maybe He'll call you to stay. Maybe He'll call you to go. But be in the place where God has called you. And at the moment, God has called us to this place, and that's why we're here. That sort of conversation.
The importance of family from a biblical point of view? Regina? Shep? This is my view. I look at the Bible stories from the Old Testament right through to Jesus. And we look at so many great leaders, in fact, who were either about to be orphaned or they were orphaned in one form or another, in some context. And God made it sure and possible for them to be taken into family, from Moses and Joseph right through to when Joseph finds out that Mary is born. Surely, these conversations, when we're talking about identity, we have to center them on Scripture. If we're going to talk about how do we help develop an identity. And surely it starts in the schools. At home. Whose responsibility is it to teach the child? Go for it. Shep, you go.
So this is my experience. My experience is, first of all, we cannot fight social media and what's happening out there because it's bigger. You cannot entertain like Sony. You cannot entertain like Instagram. However, we've got a powerful tool. It's called genuine relationship. Now, the real question is, do you have the right to speak to your children? Yeah, you can be a parent, but when you speak, do they listen? But if we get to a place, I think we were talking about it yesterday with Gus and Regina, that when you have a relationship with your children, a genuine relationship with your children, then you can start shaping the moral fiber or their character, so that when they are alone, And when they get to that stage where they have to decide, they can decide the right way. But if our focus is on trying to stop what is coming in, it doesn't kind of like work. But when your child has an encounter with God, a real encounter with God, you don't need to fight off a lot more things because they've experienced that power. They know that relationship. They understand those values. It's in them. It's real, and I think that's where the power lies in relationships.
Yeah, Regina.
Yeah, I think that's so good. I think that we cannot underestimate the value of family relationships. I think that God's design is family. We see that throughout the Bible. We even hear in Psalms that God puts the lonely in families. We know that if we've been disconnected from our family, we know that something is missing. For many of us, I come from a very broken family. My parents were drug addicts. My brother and I ended up being parented by our grandparents because my parents' addiction got so out of control that they weren't legally allowed to parent us anymore. And I will tell you that even being with Christian loving grandparents was not enough to overcome the brokenness with my brother and I with the loss of our parents. It really was not. It took a lot of work for my brother and I to be able to feel loved by my grandparents because we had this broken relationship with our parents. And when I'm in a room full of parents, I always like to ask this question about the Zimbabwean dilemma, right? So many parents feel like we have to provide for our children so that they can leave the country and be successful. And I always ask this question: what do you think is the number one predictor of a child's success? What do you think? A lot of you are parents in this room. On the panel, what do you think is the number one predictor? I usually hear things like education, right? We spend a lot of time and money trying to educate our children well. What else do we hear? Character. That's a big one that comes up. So people will say what neighborhood you live in, right? We're always looking for upward mobility in our neighborhood. I see heads nodding. We look at education. We look at financial status and health status. But the number one predictor of a child's future success, now we're not talking about monetary success. That's a faulty definition of success. We're looking at holistic future success. The number one predictor is the relationship with their primary caregiver. That is almost always mother or father. And that relationship is set during the 9 or 10 months in the womb and the first 2 years of life. Now, it can be repaired outside of those first 2 years of life, but those first 3 years, that first year of conception and the first 2 years of life, that relationship that you form with your children through nurture and through being present and spending time with them and meeting their needs, every single time that little baby cries out in distress because they're hungry or they're bored or they're wet or they're tired, and you meet that need in the distress, you're building relationship. Every single time your baby coos or says their first word or takes their first step and you're cheering them on and your face just shows total delight, that's relationship. Therapists and counselors, like many of us in this room, we can measure that, and it's called attachment. Pastors will often call it identity in Christ or positive self-worth, that we're all measuring the exact same thing, the relationship that we have with the most important person in our life, which when we're born is our parent. So for all of us who are struggling with this question of how do we provide so that our children can move into success, yes, send them to the schools that you believe are best for them, live in the neighborhood that you believe is best for them. But know without a doubt, the best thing you can do for your child's future success is to be the parent that you wish you had.
So what you're saying there, am I right, Regina, that the focus should not be on the material thing. The focus is on the relationship. So it's interesting because in some reading I came across this, written in 1958, Andrew, by C.S. Lewis, and I think it's possibly relevant. And I wanted to ask if this was relevant, and let's have a go. It says, this is from his book, Willing Slaves of a Welfare State. It says, to live his life in his own way, to call his house his castle, to enjoy the fruits of his own labor, to educate his children as his conscience directs, to save for their prosperity after his death. These are wishes deeply ingrained in a civilized man. Their realization is almost as necessary to our virtues as to our happiness. And here's the key part, I think. From their total frustration, disastrous results, both moral and psychological, may follow. Is that not, this was written in 1958, or not, I don't think any of us were born. And how relevant is that in a corporate world where we are so driven for survival, can I call it that? Are we seeing fathers that are more engrossed or more dedicated, should I say, spending more time in the workplace and not, as Andrew said, around the dinner table? Justice?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think I'll take it from the beginning from the question which you asked earlier on, that how important is family? So what I have observed is that family is crucial. If the relationship between the couple, father, mother, is good, and you are spending time with your children, chances are high that you will be able to have a good product because you will train your child. Many children, unfortunately, what I'm observing is I'm now beginning to talk to them. It's amazing the number of children that I am working with who are actually outside the country, whose lives, they are now chaotic, and the parents, come to me in desperation, saying our children are on drugs, our children are depressed. By the way, when you are taking your child outside the country, ensure that you have helped them to deal with things like loneliness and depression. It can be depressing. So the issue is this: many of us as parents, unfortunately, we have a desire to just send our kids outside. And we think that that is what success will be like, and it will make them to be successful, without sending them, having put inside of them through the family relationships enough, character that will be able to sustain them when they go out. And so my take is family is very important. It's not about many of the things that we want to actually give to our children that will make them to succeed, but it's actually what we have put inside of them that will help them to be sustained when they are now on their own.
Yeah. Define family.
Okay. I was thinking, we're throwing out this word family. And I saw this quote or this statement. It says, blood makes us related, loyalty makes us family. So we might think we have a family, but we actually don't have a family, we're just relatives. Okay, first let me send out a disclaimer. Family, I all love you, but I have to send a disclaimer. But I remember growing up that my brothers were not my blood brothers. They were the guys at school. I was a boarder. Those were my brothers. The fathers or the mothers that I thought I had, I love my mother, guys, but there were people who actually, I created my own family. So here's something I'm just throwing out there is, are you just relatives at home, or are you really a family? Because if you're a family, then that primary relationship aspect comes in. So I'm just throwing it out there, just think about it. Are you really a family unit? And a family unit doesn't mean it has to be a traditional unit, but are you really a family, or actually your child has created a family out there? And to finish off, there's a song I heard, a young guy played this song by a guy called Holy Ten. And he started talking about family. He says, Mom, I've got a family out there, and when they give me drugs, we share. in talking about drugs and how much they share their drugs and alcohol, and they don't shout at each other. And so this guy was describing what families do, but in a drug situation, which is very broken. So my question that I want to just challenge is, are you relatives living together, or are you really a family? We got to think about that.
Okay, so let's talk about other things that come up or should come up, I would assume, with children these days. And I want to ask this question: whether we're looking at the family from a traditional Zimbabwean way, whether traditional, however we want to term it, or cultural, or even if the structure of your family is faith-based, how do we discuss the gender issue? Tavonga, it's gone straight to you.
You know? Yeah, and then I get the difficult one. I think going back to that involvement aspect, I watch TV with my children. My husband and I have insisted on one television in the house, regardless of our ability to afford more, because we need to see what our children are watching. And anyone who's watched anything on TV will know that even in cartoons or whatever, there is an excuse to throw in a transgender aspect or you know, any of the LGBTQI scenarios. And so we use that as teaching moments. When it does come up on TV, we pause and we say, now, okay, so what is happening here? Is this right? And you know, that issue of communication is something that is very important. Growing up, I couldn't say a lot of things to my parents. You know, you were just told, I don't want to hear about it. You only talk to us when you're getting married type situation. But we've deliberately tried to make sure that we leave those lines open. And as parents, I encourage you, because I know some of the things you will hear will not be comfortable. They're not things that you want to hear. Yeah. You know, the one time discussing gender issues, my teen daughter says, oh, Mom, don't even worry about that. The way I like boys, I'm not even going that way. You know, and you are thinking, oh, you know, everything in you wants to crack and, you know, but you thank God that she's open enough to be able to say that to me. And we can actually have that discussion. You know, what is wrong with it? What was God's design? God's design was man and woman. And then we take it from there. So for me, I think watching things with my children has been the one way to introduce those teaching moments. Because it's a difficult thing to just walk into the room and say, okay, now let's talk about gender. Because, you know, with kids, they run away. But if it's just happening in the natural flow of things, then it's easier. And I think we really need to pray for wisdom as parents. That, you know, because at the same time, we don't want to teach them hate. Because God is love. We don't want to teach them hate, but we want them to be able to see what is right and what is wrong and to measure things by the Bible. To say, okay, whatever decisions we're making, whether it's the music we're listening to, whether it's a movie that we're watching, you know, does this go against godly principles? Does this go against what the Word advises us? And what do we do? And that's the best way to train them up. So it's just about teaching moments, because we can unsubscribe every TV channel, we can sell the TVs, but they will still be exposed. So you would rather be part of their discovery process.
So we're going to go back up to the screen, and I'm going to ask another question. And the question is it up on the screen? Yep. The question is, do you know what these all are and what they mean? Dropping all the papers. Do we know what these mean? Show of hands if we know what those mean. Yep. Okay. Should we go to the next slide? Do we know what this means? No one from Kurarama is allowed to answer. Show of hands if you do not know what that means. So just like in the previous slide, we have Mr. or Mrs. or Miss as a way to identify somebody. This is a way to identify somebody who does not identify with a gender or would prefer not to be identified with a gender. And this is a term that is being used in the first world, particularly in Europe and America, and has been used for almost 20 years, if I'm not mistaken. And this is the world we're living in. This is the world that the children are being conditioned to. And just to build on what Tavonga said, I think we all remember in the 90s, the ratings on movies, for example, was very much based on nudity and sex and violence. Now, there is a whole long list of what those ratings are about. And gender issues are coming into that. The world has changed. There is this whole different thing about how we identify people and all that. How do we balance that in a traditional society, in a cultural society where there is, Tawonga, such a strong rooting in the tradition? How do we balance this?
It's really a tough one, but I think talking to the children about it and really engaging them and finding out, because the funny thing is, you think what you are telling them is what they know. They know already. They talk. They discuss at school. So it's also good to hear what they're hearing, and if there's something there that you know is not right, that's the time for you to try and set it right. I think we cannot afford, as parents, to not be talking to our children. It's just something that we cannot afford to do. Your child cannot be locked up in their room all day, all night, and you think that they'll just come out on the other side magically. And culturally, there's a lot of, I think especially speaking in my culture, there's a lot of, these topics are considered very difficult. And it's not something that comes naturally to talk to people. I mean, even back then, they were seconded to the tete and the sekuru, your dad's sister or your mom's brother. Those are the people that were told to talk to you about puberty, and I now think gender and other things would fall into that context. But the way that things are now, with people in the diaspora and everything, sometimes your children don't have access to those relatives and everything. And the buck stops with us as the parents. And it's important that we are finding out, what do you think about, this thing? I mean, we like watching like reality shows and contests and things like that. And I remember last year in 2019, I think it was Miss Spain or someone in Miss Universe was actually a transgender. The first ever transgender beauty contestant. And they were so proud about it and just flaunting it and looking at Miss Spain, she looked just like all the other Miss anythings that were there, but born a male. So, those are things that our children are facing. And you talk about that. So what does that mean? If you're created in God's image and God in the womb forming you and shaping you said you're a girl, and then you come out and this is now the decision that you're taking, what are the implications? What does that mean? So it's important for us to be open to discussion, to hear. So it's not a lecture, it's a discussion. You also need to hear what they are saying, where they are coming from. And prayerfully, I'm always doing those 1 minute Lord help type prayers, because in the moment, the direction is not going where you want it to go. I mean, it would be nice to just say, yes, mommy, that's all right, the Bible is right, everything is right, good, mommy. But it doesn't always happen. And you have to be engaging, and you have to be praying. And if you feel that it's going too far, it's going out of hand, just say, okay, maybe let's stop here. And then we can come back later and look at it. And then, the phone call to the father, hey, help, and things like that. But that's part, I think it's just part of being family. Communication, communicate, talk.
Carry on.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I've discovered is that to our children, let me tell you, as parents, we are their heroes. Especially if we are to catch them young. You will notice that when children are young, they are looking forward to spending time with their parents. And what I've discovered is this is actually an opportunity for us to be able to talk about MX and all these things and to teach children. I just want to encourage us to spend time with our children.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, carry on.
All right, let me take a deep breath. So I would say when it comes to conversations that we feel are difficult as parents, or even just as educators, as adults in the world where kids are around, I think we need to remember that there is nothing new under the sun. That our parents had things that were hard to talk to us about, and their parents had things that were hard to talk to them about. And they may not be the same topics, but it's the same problem. If we don't know what we're talking about, if we don't know what we believe, it's going to be hard for us to engage in conversations. And that might have been the sex talks that our parents didn't want to have with us. It might have been something to do with social justice in that day and in our day and age, whatever generation we are. But our parents had hard conversations that they either chose to have with us or did not have. And I said to the panel the other day that I am going to fall far more liberal leaning on every single topic that we are going to conversate about today, other than social media access for children. That's the one I'm super conservative on. But it doesn't matter what we believe morally to be right. It matters how we engage in those conversations with our children. And the one thing that I will say as a Christian parent, in a relationship with a man who's from a totally different, far more traditional and conservative culture, where in our family we have to figure out how to have these conversations with love and respect and with God at the center. This is the one thing that I have learned, is that the way I engage in the conversation is going to lead my children to God or away from God. The way I engage in the difficult conversations are going to lead my children to me when they are in distress with hard choices to make, or away from me when they have hard choices to make. And so when the topic of how do we treat transgendered people in our community came up for our teenage daughter, I reached out to a friend of mine who lives in Zimbabwe and is a transgender woman. And I brought her to our home on a holiday, and we sat around the table, and we lovingly engaged with her. And she started coming over to our house and became part of our community. Because I'm not necessarily telling my teenage daughter, right, because my influence is different with my teenage daughter now, what to think about being right or wrong in this situation. I'm teaching her, how do we love people who are different than us? Because that is what my faith leads me to. Is there are people that are going to agree with me on issues, and there are people that are going to disagree with me on issues. But every single person across the board that comes into our life is worthy of being treated with respect and kindness. And this is what I worry about raising my children up in the church, is that there comes a moment for this generation where they see hypocrisy. And so I am trying to help my children see that I treat every single person as a child of God, and I allow the Holy Spirit to convict them about their behavior.
But it's a difficult conversation. For the Zimbabwean father, is it a difficult conversation, the gender?
It is. It's a difficult one, but I think we also need to cut some slack for the parent. We're not perfect. I mean, I had to stop parenting from guilt. And when you're parenting from guilt, you put yourself on a pedestal and you think you know it all. You don't know it. And sometimes I had to say this to my kids. I don't know. Go and ask Mrs. Ferreira. But it's good to, if you don't know, good to consult and look for those people who are skilled in that, like you.
And Andrew, for the church, should the church be having these conversations openly? Is it difficult for the church in Zimbabwe to have these conversations?
Yeah, I think it is difficult just because of the country we live in and the culture we live in. I thought MX meant motocross. And that's pretty standard. But I do feel I do feel, as other panelists have said, the importance of of engaging with people who are different and hearing their story, understanding them. And so often you realize that they are people with the same struggles and difficulties as you may have had, and just the symptoms are coming out in different ways. That's what I would say. The other thing I would say is something I've learned recently, and I think it's been there for a number of years, is that media and movies and television, and where we see all this stuff which to our natural good Zimbabwean upbringing in a Christian home is like, oh, that's terrible. How can we even watch this rubbish? And it's just, the entertainment industry is only reflecting the world we live in. They are not messed up. They are only reflecting, saying this is what's happening in the world we live in. And as much as we think they have lost the plot and creating these films, even on Disney, they're only reflecting the world that we live in. And the sooner we grasp that and say, how are we going to love and serve this world as is, the quicker we'll find ourselves living in and having these conversations with people who, before we would cross the road, before they came past. Now we've got to say, this is who it is. It doesn't make it right, but we can't ignore it either. Yeah.
And Andrew, do you think the church has a responsibility to talk about these things? And if the church is struggling with this, should the church leadership be talking about this, leading the way?
Yeah, definitely. I think the church has a responsibility to speak about this. I think it's to engage. For too long the church has been the last place somebody with different gender issues would come, because they're so afraid of being judged. And we've heard them literally say that, I would never go to a church because of the judgment. So I do think the church has got to be talking about it, trying to help our people, not condoning it or saying it's right, and we've got to stand on biblical principles. But I do think we've got to speak more about it. For too long it's been taboo in the church to say some of these things, but our people are facing it every day. So
I'm going to stick with you, but I'm going to change the subject slightly. We spoke about taboo things to talk about, and I think even culturally for a long time talking about mental health in general has been difficult, and we don't do it, particularly from a Zimbabwean man point of view. Do you feel that the church is talking enough about mental health in general, doing enough about making awareness about this? Putting you on the spot there, Andrew.
Yeah, I would say not necessarily. I'm shooting myself in the foot, because I know my people are going to say, yes, you said on that thing, now why aren't you talking about it? I think mental health is something in our world that's the elephant in the room that we're all trying to hide from. And yet, again, we can engage and we can talk about it, particularly in the last 2 years. For what the world's been through, I think it's shot up the percentage of mental health challenges and difficulties. I think vulnerability of church leaders is possibly the key or the door. I don't know the percentages, but I would guess a lot of church leaders are struggling with mental health themselves, with no one to talk to.
And a lot of businessmen, not just businessmen, a lot of people in business are struggling with mental health, and I would say for a long time they've been struggling with some form of mental health. How is that affecting the child when we're taking that home?
Yeah, I have been of late working with organizations who have realized that mental health is a huge issue. And so they are beginning to allow counselors to counsel their people, which is a good sign. Because the reality is, if we are suffering from mental health for various reasons, maybe pressure, of work, maybe simple biological issues, and we don't know. The challenge is, like what Regina said earlier on, we cannot speak authoritatively on issues which we don't know. So even as pastors, we need to actually be educated when it comes to mental health issues, so that we can communicate about these issues to the congregants.
So we just go back to the slide, some statistics on mental health, and I think there is also, there has for a long time been a view that children don't necessarily suffer with this, that they don't understand it enough. I'm not entirely sure how that works. I'm a person who from a very young age struggled with depression, and globally depression is one of the leading causes of illnesses and disabilities among adolescents. And the most interesting part of that for me is the leading cause of disability, not just illness, just that being disabled from being able to function normally. And half of all mental health conditions start by the age of 14, but most cases are undetected and untreated. Undetected and untreated. As someone interested in Christian education, the Christian schools, Tavonga, are the Christian schools doing enough? Should they be doing anything about it? Is it their responsibility?
Yes, I think definitely there's need for more input, but I think it's a coordinated effort with the parents. So something like this would be a start, where we talk to parents and educate parents about the realities of, if there were sessions on realities of mental health, how can you check, what does behavior change in your teen look like, what does it possibly mean, how can you open lines of communication and things like that. So, and I think most schools now have Belinda, counselors and people that are there to help children and talk to children. So I think those are steps. It's obviously not 100% there, because I know, like the month of May, we were saying it's Mental Health Awareness Month. But then when you look at Zimbabwe social media and some of the Zimbabwean platforms, it's not so much out there because it's not something that we are very big on yet. But I think it's something that we are developing, especially talk radios. I think Capital covered quite a bit of the discussions and things like that, which is helpful. But I think just getting it more and more out there, especially in the schools, because when you then hear, I think it was last year or the year before, where there was some high school student who jumped from a parkade, the parkade in town, and committed suicide. And, you can then wonder what was happening with him. And, teachers, did they see the parents? You're just left with a lot of questions. But it's not anyone's fault. There's no blame shifting or anything. But I think it's something that we need to be heightened to. And even just as parents, again, that communication and involvement, you're quicker to see changes in your child if you spend time with your child. And you can see that this is now unusual. This is not the way that my child normally behaves. And then you're able to discuss and try and get help for them. Because I think, I like what Chef said about, we're not experts, we don't know everything, and we are not going to solve everything. So we can then get the help for our children. But I think definitely schools are getting there, and parents as well just need that heightened awareness. And together, I think we can really help our children with mental health.
And that's for the children. What about the parents that are struggling with mental health themselves?
Can I say one thing?
Carry on.
I would say that mental illness is a parent's responsibility to help children get help. But I think that mental health is a community collective responsibility. Just like in Christian education, when we talk about our body and taking care of our body with fitness and the things that we do to be physically fit, the things that we do to be spiritually fit, if we're talking about ourselves holistically as body, spirit, soul, mind, and we're talking about and encouraging physical fitness and spiritual fitness, but we're ignoring mental fitness, then we are absolutely dropping the ball. Right? We have to acknowledge that we are a mind and a body and a spirit, and that all three of those work together. Now, when there's mental illness, when there's suicidality, depression, anxiety, The parents, need to be responsible for seeking mental health treatment for the child. And often that will come through the school counselor or through, a recommendation through the school as well. But I do think that mental health is something that we have to talk about as different than mental illness. Because 100% of the people on the planet have a level of mental health. Just like we all have different levels of physical fitness or spiritual fitness, we all have different levels of mental fitness. And we as a community at church and at school and at home and in our family can be discussing mental health.
Okay, thanks. That's about the children. What about the adults? What about the fathers looking after their own mental health? Is this a struggle that you see with fathers, the Zimbabwean men, not just fathers, coming forward and being willing to actually deal with it for themselves?
I mean, it's a struggle which we have, and the probably sad part is that culture does not accept the reality of mental health and mental illness. And so people do suffer from mental illness and hide. Mental health issues are actually hidden, and yet many people are actually having a problem with that. So my take is that we need to speak more about mental health and accept a reality that people can suffer from mental illnesses. Some of the people that I've worked with, it has been very difficult to even convince them to go and get medication, for example, for depression, because they have had, little knowledge is very dangerous. They have been told a lot of things, negative things from others, and they have believed these things that medication for depression is not good, and yet it actually can help people. So we need to begin to talk, much more concerning mental health and mental illness, so that the community can actually understand these things. And when we do that, we'll be able to help one another.
Go for it.
When we talk about men and mental health, I don't think, this is my personal opinion, that the world is, or the communities are very welcoming to men when we own up to being depressed. When we say that, I mean, it doesn't quite work. The other thing is, working with men, you need skill, because we are not very good at sitting around in circles and talking about our feelings. Because the minute you say mental health, we think that, and we're already scared. So you need a skill on how to work with men. And for me, what I see as a ticking time bomb is the boys, because not a lot of people understand boys, and especially in schools, they're being treated like bad girls. And boys work very, very differently. And once we become aware of what's going on in a boy's life, and we begin to speak their language, and we begin to create places where there's psychological safety for them, I think we will start addressing this whole mental health issue with them as they grow up. I had an incident 2 weeks ago. I sat down with the mom who said that their child had a problem, and for 1 hour the mother was telling me what the problem was. Then I sat with the boy, and we were done in 8 minutes. And it was done. 8 minutes, we finished. And that's the little skill that, as a parent, just also be aware that when you're working with your boys, the boys are not going to need as much time as the other guys, and to just be prepared for that and learn to understand their language and how they communicate.
Yeah. Folks, the cost of mental health on an economy, on a company, on a home. 16% of the global burden of disease and injury in people aged 10 to 19 are because of mental health. Globally, that is a massive amount of burden on any society. We're going to sort of start bringing this to a close now. The last sort of thing we're just going to touch on now is the peer pressure side of things, which is such a obvious thing. And one of our experiences is it's sometimes too easy to to use by parents. But I just want to touch on it purely from a statistical point of view. The drive to use drugs or drink alcohol for a teen, to fit in, to belong, to feel okay, to numb pain, whether that is emotional pain or social pain, I like to call it. More than 50% of teenagers worldwide will use or come into contact with marijuana before they leave school. And it's in a survey done, and I'm just going to write these. This is an old survey. It's 10 years old now, okay, if I've got my maths right. It's a South African survey, and why am I zoning in on South Africa? Well, two reasons. We don't have a lot of statistics in Zimbabwe that are available, but you know, South Africa is the big brother, or maybe the small brother, however we want to look at it. And so much of what we do as Zimbabweans involves South Africa, from a shopping, trading, education point of view for tertiary education. 85% of South African teenagers said that they knew where to get marijuana, and 55% said they knew where to get amphetamines, so ecstasy and the likes. 29% of teenagers said that they had been offered or sold or given an illicit drug on school property. And 80% said that it had come from a fellow pupil. This is happening even in our schools. We know that from our work at Project Kurarama. This is happening here. How much of it, I don't know. But that's massive quantities of people. And here's an interesting one to end off on. 40% of teenagers under the age of 14 said that they watch pornography. We know that that's happening in this country in junior schools. Pornography is being watched by junior school children on smart devices, okay? And we ask ourselves this question: is it necessary for a child to have a smartphone? And if the answer is yes, are the adults or is the child being provided the opportunity to be taught how to use that safely? And I know that Regina is just dying to comment on something like this.
I'm actually not, because almost every parent disagrees with me. This is the thing. I think that every parent has to make their decision about when to give children devices. Almost all of our schools require devices for academics now, and I think that that's totally fine. I think as parents, we have to be aware of our children using those devices outside of academic use. And I think that we have to set the parameters, and we have to help our children understand the boundaries. I think often we think if we put apps and security things on our computers that it limits our children's ability to receive and view pornography, but the truth of the matter is it does not. Anything you can put on your child's device, they can get around. And the number one way that pornography is distributed in Zimbabwe is WhatsApp. So if your child is accessing WhatsApp, you are almost guaranteed that they will at some point in time get a video or a picture that is pornographic. My family thinks I'm a little bit nutty about this, but our rule at home is that our teenage daughter will get a smartphone when she is old enough to have a job and buy that device for herself. She has an iPad that she uses for school, and she has a laptop that she uses for school, but when she comes home and homework is done, where she is visible to us, when she's done with homework, those devices get put in my bedroom to charge so that she's not on them overnight. And we are really strict about this. When her friends come over for a sleepover, there's a basket in the kitchen, their devices go in that basket, and they get them on the way out. Right? Because so that way they can just hang out with each other. And people still come to my house for sleepovers. Like, the kids don't say, oh, we're not going to that house because we can't have our phone. They love coming to our house because they get to do all the silly kid stuff that they've wanted to do that they're embarrassed to do when someone is potentially videoing. Right? It allows them just freedom to live. I know that I err way on a conservative side in terms of social media and smart devices for my children, but the reason I do that is because our brain is developing until our mid-20s, And if I, as an adult, struggle to manage social media appropriately, how can I expect a child whose brain is not fully developed to be able to manage that too? It is very hard. When I was studying social work, 25 years ago, we were talking about internet pornography, and the research was saying that internet porn was as addictive as heroin. But the science was wrong about that. We thought that it was the pornography because of the dopamine surge that happens when you are sexually aroused. What we now know, what has been proven, is that the internet is as addictive as heroin. That every like on Instagram, every follow on TikTok, every whatever app your kids are using, every time someone gives them any attention on social media, that's a dopamine surge. And just like I would not give my 17-year-old daughter limited use of heroin, I'm not giving her limited use of social media.
That's great. Isn't that a good way of putting it? She says she wasn't dying to say it, but I knew she was, and it's great that the way you've put it. Folks, we're going to bring this to a close, and I just want to thank everyone that's been on the panel for your wisdom, for your courage to speak your hearts and your own stories in some cases. I want to close on this, something I think Andrew sent to our group, or was it Gus? Gus this morning says this: children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they have never failed to imitate them. We live in a distracting, fast-paced world, but our kids need us to stop, look them in the eye, and listen. They have big thoughts, feelings, and dreams, and they are dying to express them to us. Choose to give them the gift of your time and attention. You listening will make them feel loved and valued more than you ever might know. And I want to close on saying this. We struggle with these things. We struggle with these topics. At what point do you, as fathers, as parents, draw a line in the sand and say, as for me and my house, I will serve the Lord? Thank you for joining us.